All right, so this is going to be your lecture video for Chapter 6 on self-disclosure. Self-disclosure is important. It's a building block for relationships, and it varies according to the kind of relationship that we have with someone. So different contexts, whether they're work relationships, and again, even those vary. If it's say your boss, that's a place of power, so that relationship is going to be different as far as self-disclosure as maybe a peer-to-peer situation. So we're going to be looking at this idea of self-disclosure, mostly because we need to realize how much it does affect ourselves, how people perceive ourselves, and also how that affects relationships. So we need to be aware of that. If you've ever heard the phrase TMI, too much information, that sometimes has to do with the idea that someone has self-disclosed too much. All right, so first page, and this is related to page 95 to 99 in your book. All right, we want to talk about how it's defined. What is self-disclosure? And there are a few characteristics that it has to have in order to meet the definition of self-disclosure. We let, first of all, other people know us by willingly revealing personal information. All right, so that means it's a choice. It's a choice that we make. It's not something that you are forced into. It's something you decide to do, and it's a matter of trusting that person with this information. All right, because it's going to be information. As you look at the second bullet point on the first page of these notes, it includes current information. And when we say current, I think you need to think of the fact that it's information that impacts you currently, right? So for people to know this, it can affect their perception of you either positively or negatively because it does have impact. So if you were to reveal this, it has current impact on your life. It has to be personal. All right, it has to be personal. So something, again, it's things that you don't just tell everyone. All right, and it has to be revealing. So it has to meet all of these criteria in order for it to be self-disclosure, because self-disclosure always involves risk. All right, it always involves risk. It's always truthful. It's always honest. It's obviously you're not self-disclosing anything if you haven't said something honest. All right, so you are allowing someone to have this information about you that not everybody knows. So it involves that deliberate choice. It's also, when you share it, it's considered to be mutual and confidential. All right, it's confidential. We're going to talk about reciprocity too with this shortly. But mutual, again, means you and you've confided in this other person with this personal, revealing, currently impactful information that not everybody knows. And you don't expect that person to be telling other people. All right, if that person does tell other people and it has an impact on you because of that, then that will affect that relationship negatively, whether short term or long term, depends on the circumstances. It's also dyadic and continual, and this has to do with the maintenance of the relationship. It's this idea, again, we'll look at reciprocity, but it's about I share something, that means that you share something. And we kind of build trust this way. So we expect it to be dyadic, which means between two people, and continual. In other words, if someone in a relationship, a close relationship, if the two people typically self-disclose this kind of information to each other, and then one of them stops, then that is going to cause a problem because it's not continual, it's not dyadic anymore, and it will begin to damage the relationship. All right, so there are risks at different levels according to the way that your book puts it, and I think that's kind of valuable to look at. I don't know that these are hard, fast categories, but it gives you an idea of kind of how to categorize the types of risk that you have, because self-disclosure always involves risk. So low risk would be sharing our thoughts, opinions, and attitudes. Now, again, in a volatile situation where there's high emotion, that might be a case where that could be risky, more risky than a low risk. But typically, if you want to share your opinion about things, then you typically can do that. It's not very personal. Now, it can depend on what kind of topic it is, again. So, I think people can be very sensitive about certain kinds of topics in our culture, especially today. Whether, again, it's COVID-19 responses or lack of responses, or things controversial like abortion issues, capital punishment issues, just things like that. Um, so again, but typically sharing just our thoughts on something or an attitude overall is considered a lower risk most of the time. A moderate risk is where you're disclosing emotions that we're experiencing in any given situation. So, because when we share emotions, we feel vulnerable. We're going to, it does create a vulnerable situation when we share our emotions. It gives someone the opportunity to be able to hurt us. Um, if when we trust someone to share those emotions with another person, that's an important part of that relationship. So again, that's a more moderate risk. So it's not going to be something that's entirely destructive necessarily of a relationship, but certainly it's something that has a higher risk than just sharing your thoughts or attitudes or opinions about something. And the high risk is the one where you have disclosure of intimate personal details, right? And what most would consider secrets. Everybody has those things in their lives that they don't want to tell other people. And even sometimes in the closest of relationships, there can still be some things held back. So, and that's okay. It's just that has to be weighed, right, within a specific relationship. What would be considered high risk in one context, say an employer employee relationship, even if you've known someone for a long time, um, it still has a higher risk to it, right? Than say someone that you're married to, for example. It shouldn't have as high a risk. Now, again, if that relationship isn't healthy, then again it does have a high risk. So again, you have to take these categories and kind of think about different contexts, situations, the health of a particular relationship, and the boundaries that we have established in different relationships. All right, so this first model of self-disclosure in the middle of the page, on page 1 of chapter 6 notes, shows you what's called the Johari window. And mostly I just want you to recognize what it is. It's one way to, again, begin to understand what self-disclosure is. So when we look at this, and of course I'm looking at my notes from time to time, so I would hope you have yours in front of you as well, like we would in class. But if you look at this, you'll see that there's 4 windows in this overall window, 4 frames. All right, and the first one is the open area. So we're really looking at everything about you in this window. So we'll just use me as an example. I have an open area, and that area is known to me and it's known to you. And as students, there's a certain amount of information you already know about me, and there's a certain amount of information I know about you. But there's certain things that are open to you. Now I'm kind of recording in my home, so you're picking up a few details, not very many, but it's still open. I'm not concerned about it, because the open area in a relationship is not something that really involves risk. Okay, so that doesn't fit any of the criteria that you need to have self-disclosure. It's open, known to me, known to other people. It's something that's visible. They know what color hair I have. They know I wear glasses. They know different things about my approximate height, etc. All right. So I mean, they know certain things about me. Those things are open. If somebody wants to know that where I teach, it's pretty easy to look up online. So that's in the open area as well. So you kind of get the idea with that. All right, and then you have the blind area, and that's the area that I don't know, but other people see. And so we like to think, and even at my age, I happen to know that some people see things that I don't see. Um, for example, actually, I'm having to watch myself and listen to myself in a recording, which has not been my favorite thing. I prefer live theater when I'm acting and live performance. But again, there are things that people see. about me and understand about me, people, especially people that are close to me, that I might not realize, right? We kind of have blinders sometimes. And so that's a valuable thing because people can give us feedback and tell us their perceptions. And sometimes it's positive and it's surprising. And other times it could be something negative and that you need to reflect about. So we do have this blind area, all right? So that is affected by your relationships. All right, so in the third window, it's the hidden. It's not known to us and it's not known to other people. So this is the area where we get really our self-disclosure. It's the things that we say, do I let someone know or do I hide it? Do I let them know or do I need to keep that inside because it makes me vulnerable and I don't need everyone to know all those things about me. Remember we talked in last chapter, chapter 5, about our presenting self, our public self, our face to others. So again, this is where self-disclosure is going to affect that too. There's just some things I might have shared with, say, a close partner or a spouse, and you know, I expect them to keep that to themselves. So if they do say that in public or in a social gathering, that's going to be upsetting to me because I expect it to just be between us. So this hidden part varies according to the relationship, how close it is, the trust in that relationship. And then the fourth window is the unknown, which is unknown to me, right? And unknown to other people. I think I misquoted on the third one, right? That's known to self. I think I said unknown. So yeah, sorry about that. But the third window is what's known to me but not to others, and that's hidden. I'm purposely choosing to do that. And then that fourth one is the one that's unknown to me and unknown to others. Those are the areas where that's where we don't know. Things that we have yet to discover about ourselves that other people don't know that we are capable of. And maybe that part of that is our resilience that we can show in how we handle, finishing the semester, and getting through our lives in other ways during this pandemic that we're experiencing, something that nobody that I even know, my parents included, have ever experienced anything in their lives like this. So it's something that we're adapting to, and so we didn't know we could handle this, but we are handling this, right? We're going to continue to handle this. So, but again, I see resilience of students. I see people facing all kinds of adversity and trying their best to handle this situation. So that's just one means of things that we're discovering. What do we so that unknown area is how much is yet untapped. How much do we not know about me and others don't see in me either? What am I capable of doing, becoming, right, creating? So these windows now, and again, I'm just going to summarize them again. So the first one is open, which means it's things that are known to facts, right? That are known about myself and known to others as well. It's readily available to people. And the second window is the blind window where other people can see things that I cannot see about myself. And the third one is the hidden area where I have things that I have kept to myself that others, I know, but others do not know. And then the fourth one is the unknown, which is unknown to both myself and other people that we're yet discovering. So one thing about this is each relationship you have, you can adjust these windows. So, and the one that we're talking about the most is that hidden area. So if you say employer-employee relationship, your hidden area might be very large, all right? Whereas if it's a best friend, a close family member, a spouse, a partner, whatever, that area, that hidden area is smaller because we share more things. So all four of those windows can kind of be adjusted, but the one we're most concerned about is that hidden area. All right, so that's just kind of a way to help us understand what's involved in self-disclosure, what kinds of information. All right, so let's talk about reasons that we do self-disclose. I've already kind of talked about the fact that we self-disclose to those who are close to us. We self-disclose more to those people. So one reason that we do it though, and that we need to do it, and maybe you're doing it with someone now, I hope that you're able to do that because it's probably necessary. And that is the idea of catharsis. Catharsis means purging of emotion. So what this has to do with is it's getting it off your chest. And it's a very healthy, important thing to do. Many years ago, probably about 15 years ago, when I was going through a very troubled time with some family members, um, under a great deal of stress. And my doctor was telling me, I was driving back and forth to SIU, and she said, you know, when you're alone in your car, you need to be saying all those things you want to say to those people and getting it off your chest. Just say it out loud, because internalizing those things is actually very damaging to your body, to your mental health, your physical health. So sometimes we just need to be able to get it out, vent. That's another word we used today, to vent. You know, I just need to be able to do that. You know, I have a family member now. So it's a wife and a husband, and the husband is actually normally an extremely quiet person, very calm person, but because of the situation they have been out in working in grocery and that sort of thing. Anyway, it really got upsetting several days ago, and he just had to rant. And once he finished, he felt much better. So sometimes we just have to do that. We have to self-disclose. We have to say what's going on so we don't keep it inside. All right. And then we usually feel better. We have more clarity, and we have our emotions more under control. Clarification. Sometimes if hopefully you've got someone or a couple of people that you talk to about your problems. My older sister, I do that a lot with. I do that some with my mother. Mostly I try to not put it on her anymore. And sometimes with my younger sister. But my older sister's been the one that I've done this the most with. And so sometimes we talk through a problem or feelings or thoughts we're saying because we're trying to process it. We're trying to come to decisions. We're trying to cope. And so sometimes we've got to talk it through. And what happens is by the time you get done talking to this person and letting them know all these things, you begin to feel less confused. You feel like it's clarified for you. You may discover just by talking out loud to someone, you may discover what it is that you need to do. Validation, sometimes we self-disclose because, again, we want confirmation for the decisions we've already made and the choices we've already made. We want to kind of lay it out there for someone we trust and get that feedback of validation, confirmation that this person understood why I would have done such a thing, why I would have made that decision. So that's why. And maintenance of relationships, okay? Oh, sorry, I skipped reciprocity. So reciprocity, self-disclosure promotes self-disclosure in other people in relationships, right? It's what develops and maintains the trust, as I've been talking about that, and improves the health of that relationship. So if we disclose to an individual, we've kind of opened the door for them to also self-disclose to us. So what happens is if we self-disclose, we expect somebody else to self-disclose. We kind of keep score. So this is what I was talking about a little bit earlier, right? In that it's dyadic and continual. So when somebody stops self-disclosing, they're closing a door, okay? And when you do that, then the relationship begins to deteriorate in certain ways. Doesn't mean you can't fix that problem, but it is a symptom of a relationship that is not in the best of health at that time. All right, so maintenance, again, this is what I was just talking about, that couples who do self-disclose together, they actually remain together. So it is necessary. And if you find yourself withdrawing and not self-disclosing, then you need to check in with that. You need to reflect on that and think, about how it's affecting your relationship, and communicate that to a partner if that's what's going on there, because that relationship this is what keeps it honest, how you stay honest with each other. Once you start not being honest with each other in those closest of relationships, it does become a problem and deteriorates, which we'll be looking more at relationships in the next unit, the last unit. Again, health, I've already mentioned that it reduces stress, even heart disease. It reduces those things. It's a healthier thing to do for you, mentally and physically. So it is a necessity. On the second page at the top, you'll also see the idea of identification, or the sense of our identity. Sometimes we're self-disclosing to manage that identity, choosing what we disclose and to whom we disclose that about our personality in various situations, right? We play different kinds of roles. This also leads to the last point, which is about social control. We want to be on our best behavior, and this has to do too with that idea of our face, right? Our presenting self. That we're trying to keep that intact in these various situations by using the right amount of self-disclosure, so we have some control. It's related to this idea of identity management, the previous point we were making. So these are two overlapping ideas. So we don't want to disclose information that makes us look bad. We want to preserve that presenting self, that face that we have. All right. This next part, again, it's more about you just recognizing what it is. It's another way to look at your relationships and what kinds of self-disclosure you use and how much of it, by using the idea of depth and breadth. All right. So and they always describe this social penetration theory as the idea of layers to an onion and peeling back layers. So in that outer layer, you'll see you have superficial information, likes, dislikes, tastes, and music. Again, this is that low risk kind of self-disclosure that we talked about earlier, right? Clothing, things that don't really aren't going to really hurt us truly. So that's on the outer ring, okay? And then you have intimate information, a little more intimate, political views, right? Social attitudes, things that are more how you line up with sociocultural ideas and attitudes. Personal information is the next one, and that's the spiritual values, the deep fears, the hopes, goals, fantasies, all those things that are kind of our deepest sense of self. There might be some secrets in there, but the core information is the most private information about a person that hardly anybody knows, and maybe in some cases some of that information nobody knows about you. So when you look at it, again, you would be able to, the depth, let's talk about the idea of depth and breadth. So you have these different levels, and that indicates the depth of information that we just went over. The breadth is how many, right, topics that you're looking at. So maybe you have, maybe you talk about the personal information, or even the intimate information. Maybe you talk about those, but which is deeper, all right? But you do it about only a couple of topics. Or do you have great breadth in that you talk about all kinds of topics in your personal layer of your onion, right? With a person. So that, hopefully you'll kind of get the idea. I'm not going to be asking you questions about how much does this person know about this person. It's really just about recognizing what this model is, all right? And that's it on that. And really the idea is just to see how the different ways to look at how self-disclosure is working in our variety of relationships in different contexts. All right. So the last and final beneficial reason for self-disclosure, it's not beneficial, I'm sorry, is manipulation, right? This is where we self-disclose to manipulate other people. We might even self-disclose to hurt someone in this case. And obviously this is one that we don't need to do, because this is not going to maintain our relationships to do this. So, and people do this to get someone to react in a certain way. So they are looking for a reaction. They're manipulating by self-disclosing something. So, if someone wants to self-disclose, something very hurtful to you, just to get a reaction, maybe, okay, maybe they're saying, oh, I just wanted to tell you that I'm dating your ex-husband or something, or your ex-wife, you know, and there's no reason to even tell you that, especially, let's say this relationship isn't even a very close one. I mean, that's self-disclosure just to hurt somebody in that kind of a case. So we don't want to do those things. Those are not helpful at all. All right, so next page. All right, we want to talk about some alternatives to self-disclosure. Sometimes it's uncomfortable to self-disclose, and we don't want to self-disclose, and we've been asked a question, and we do not want to tell. You don't want to be honest. You don't want to tell the truth about what you feel, think, or have experienced. We want to do this again. Sometimes we're doing it as an alternative because the self-disclosure is too risky, as we said here, or you're trying to save face. Nobody wants to look bad, remember. If we want to refrain from hurting someone's feelings, sometimes people ask us the truth, and we know there's no reason to tell them what we really think because we know it would be hurtful, and it really wouldn't benefit the relationship. There's really no point in telling it. All right, so the last one again is about trying to manipulate. Sometimes people want to do this in order to manipulate. Again, you're being intentionally negative or harmful. That's not beneficial, but destructive instead. All right, but let's look at some alternative strategies that we might use. That's kind of a little more important here. So some things, obviously, instead of telling the truth, we can lie. All right, so that's the first one, just lie. And if you don't outright lie, sometimes we tell partial truths, or it's also known as equivocating, all right? And I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. I'll give you some examples of that. So we can equivocate. We'll come back to that in this example. All right. We could also hint. So this is more indirect. In other words, you're not lying. You're not telling the truth and hurting someone. That's disclosure. You're not lying because maybe you're not comfortable with lying. Maybe you don't even want to equivocate, which is finessing the truth, and we're going to go through that. But you may hint, which is kind of like an indirect suggestion. It's sort of between the lines. It's just kind of offering a suggestion, trying to get a person to behave a certain way or make a certain kind of choice by hinting around rather than just coming right out and saying something. And then you also have withholding, which also could be silence or masking, as the book calls it. So again, that's just omitting the truth, right? Omitting or hiding the truth when you use silence, which I think I've said before that my mother used to do quite a bit, and I would know she's not saying what she thinks because she knows it's going to cause a problem, so she's just using silence. All right. So those are some of the ways that we do equivocate. I want to give you an example of equivocating because that's probably the more well, it's finessing the truth is the best way I've ever heard it told. So you might write that down, finessing the truth. And how do I tell the truth so I don't feel like I'm lying? That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to tell a partial truth or something that means one thing to you when you say it, but will be taken a different, more positive way by the person to which you're telling this equivocation. For example, let's say that a very close friend of yours who's worked very hard and doesn't make a lot of money and you're about to move into your brand new apartment and you're really proud. You've worked hard to get there. And this person has saved and scrimped to buy you something for your new apartment that you've just moved into. And you've really chosen things carefully to reflect your sense of who you are and your taste. And so this friend of yours gives you this painting. Now, this is a very close friend of yours who's, let's say, also a very sensitive person. And again, in some relationships, you might not feel the need to equivocate. But let's say you know that if you told the truth, which is that you think it's the ugliest thing you've ever seen, this painting is horrible, and you certainly don't want to hang it up in your home. So one thing that you could say to avoid hurting someone's feelings, the other person, would be something like, what an unusual painting. I've never seen anything like it. It's really different. And I know that you have probably said something like this to somebody at some time. All right, you get a gift from a close relative or a friend, and it's they were trying to find something that you would like, and it's you don't like it, so but you just don't want to hurt them. Sometimes that's just how we do. And so you might use that. Now, another way, another equivocal response in that same situation might be something like, oh, yes, I am so glad you got this for me. Or maybe that's too much of a lie. Thank you. That would be okay. Thank you. Because you are thanking them for thinking about you. Thank you. I will hang it up just as soon as I find the right place for it. And of course, you're probably not ever going to find the right place. That's really what you mean when you say that, and you're hoping they're not going to come over and see that it's not hanging up. Or maybe you'll rush around and find a place to hang it temporarily. So that's equivocating. You're finessing the truth. You're saying something that you know means one thing to you, but it means something else to the other person. It's either a partial truth, finessing the truth, but not outright lying. All right. And so we're probably very familiar with that one. I doubt there's anybody who hasn't done it. Okay. So you can look at this example, right? And I would say I'm trying to let's go over. Your friend asked you if you had a good time when you went out with his cousin last night, but you didn't have a good time. So self-disclosure, I didn't have a great time, but then we were just getting to know each other. I mean, I don't think we have that much in common. So that's and it may be perfectly fine to use that. We just have to think, here's these other strategies though. So that's the actual honest self-disclosure. But if you don't want to do that, you can try these other things. Silence. So this person's thinking, well, maybe if I don't say anything at all when they ask me, maybe you'll just change the subject. That's another way to use silence as well, right? You just kind of change the subject or don't say anything at all, let them continue, all right? Lying, oh, your cousin was a lot of fun. The movie was great. I mean, that's just a lie, okay, because you didn't have a good time. Equivocating. First dates are really a time of discovery, aren't they? And yes, you discovered something, all right. You discovered that you did not like this person. You didn't have anything in common with this person. You're very uncomfortable with this person. So that's equivocating. You're just kind of saying it in a question form, and you're saying this is really just a time to learn this person, to get to know them. And that's all you say. You're not really saying yay or nay. So you're kind of leaving part of the truth out in that one. Hinting, I don't think I have to have a great time every night, meaning saying that, I know it didn't really go that well, but it may have just been an off night. But maybe don't, set me up again. So you're kind of hinting around that, maybe it was bad. You're just sort of hinting at that. And, a lot of people, you can decide what you think is more ethical for you in any given situation. All right, so let's go on to the next few points that we have here, which is self-disclosure is challenging. It is challenging, and sometimes we've made choices that we wish we hadn't made with self-disclosure and who we disclosed it to. Your book talks about emotional challenges on pages 106 and 107. And we are going to talk much more about emotion in the next video, and the notes that I give you on emotions as an addendum, because there's not a lot that they give you in this textbook about that. They do give you some, but we will kind of skim it now as far as emotions are concerned, and we'll come back to that with the next lesson. So you've got a few facts here, and you can go over those. I just pulled those out so that you can think about them, because again, you know, if you look at who discloses more, right? The U.S. we disclose a great deal. We like to disclose, and we do it openly, more frequently, right? And about more topics, right? Than Great Britain, Puerto Rico, Japan, most Middle Eastern countries. So we are. I mean, Americans, U.S. citizens, are pretty well known for kind of just telling whatever they feel like telling to people, whereas some are much more conservative in these other countries. But we also establish trust much more quickly, uh, again because we're self-disclosing more quickly and we expect self-disclosure quickly, so that's going to build trust more quickly, and those relationships, whether in a positive or a negative way. All right. And the men in the U.S. compared to men in these other countries, right, self-disclose more. I mean, just overall, we self-disclose a great deal. Um, and on your next page, it'll be page 4. I didn't mark those for you, but at the top where it says a contrast here, right, in Mexico, positive information is frequently disclosed, but not the sharing of negative information. So, in other words, they really want to keep harmony, social harmony. And so you can talk all you want, and they encourage a lot of self disclosure, just not about negative things. And we probably have a tendency to think of it being more negative, things that are risky. So they discourage that. All right. A few gender challenges here. And again, and I will talk more about some of this with chapter 7, which we won't spend a lot of time in because most of it's self explanatory. And I'll give you notes that'll highlight what I might want you to look at. But um, you need to realize what they're talking about, and make sure you look at the book and let me know if you have questions. But when we look at patterns of, again, male and females, kind of overall, and you always have to remember these are patterns. They're not hard, fast, set rules of how someone behaves. It's just a pattern that's been researched and noticed, okay? It's typical. If you're talking about men and women, they don't really get into as much gender identity kind of issues, but certainly that has an effect on it, depending on your point of view. But universally, that means across the globe, right? Men self disclose less than women. Now, yes, US men disclose more than other men in all these other countries, but generally, women self disclose more, especially as relationships become more intimate, and they keep disclosing higher and higher levels. But men typically in this, what they've talked about in your textbook, disclose initially what they're going to disclose, and then they kind of just stay, the same level. So that may be where in some male female relationships that might cause some friction, because women are still wanting to talk more and know more and let me know what's happening more and that kind of thing, then men may want to disclose because they're thinking, I'm the same person that I always was. I always let you know what's happening, But so that probably causes some friction at times. And women will talk about more topics, so it's lots of topic areas, more disclosure. Again, it's not like they tell it to everybody. We still choose specific people to talk to. Okay. And why men and women choose, right, to avoid self-disclosure in a relationship is to maintain the relationship, and to avoid the risk of emotional pain to themselves or others. That's what women will tend to do. Again, it's a tendency among females. That doesn't mean it's everybody, by far. But they do tend to be more often more relationship oriented and keeping that harmony, which is something we've talked about before. But with men, they tend to avoid more often disclosure to maintain control, what they perceive as them keeping in control and not allowing themselves to be vulnerable. So, I mean, these are patterns, and believe me, they're not true for everybody, but it's something to think about and look at, in your relationships and see, because being aware of it is a big part of the battle of how to become a more effective communicator in your relationships. So, all right. Guidelines for self-disclosure you can look at. There's really no need, I don't think, for me to go over those questions. I mean, overall, you want to stop and think. Um, and again, some of us have, more difficulty with this than others. I mean, if some of us will tell too much about ourselves and put ourselves at risk unnecessarily. Some of us may not tell enough to those that are close to us. So you want to use these questions if it's appropriate for the situation. I mean, there are definitely times when, you know, um, I have a person in my family that has a very difficult time in being able to even process what's going on right now with the pandemic. And as I learned what was happening, I didn't self disclose. I didn't really self disclose too much. Sometimes I don't need to, because it actually kind of puts that person in a more stressful situation than they need to be. So, is it appropriate in the circumstances? The topic appropriate? Again, that TMI, too much information. Sometimes you don't need to be saying it. Um, and uh, will that person that we're sharing with see it as something beneficial? There's no need to unload on somebody if it's not a beneficial thing to that relationship. I mean, right? I mean, so we have to think about those things. Um, are we trying to, create mutual understanding, or are we trying to hurt somebody? Because we don't need to self disclose if our purpose is to hurt someone. That's not a healthy thing in a relationship. And that risk factor, I mean, you really have to think about that too. So, I mean, there are some situations, even in extremely close relationships, like, for example, domestic violence, that can take place. Sometimes you can't self disclose in a dangerous situation. So that's another reason why you may decide not to, at least at that time. All right. So, self disclosure, characteristically, at the bottom of the page, should occur in relationships, right, that have existed over a long period of time. You don't typically self disclose your deepest secrets to someone that you've only known for a short period of time, whether that be, a few dates, or, a couple of months. You kind of have to decide for yourself, but it's not, you don't put your most vulnerable information about yourself out there with someone where you haven't had enough time to build enough trust. And just realize what the risk is. If the shorter that you've known someone, the more risk there is there. So it needs to be gradual. You start out with the more surface things and you move deeper. You don't go straight to the deeper things. One thing about social media and all this is it has affected self-disclosure for people in some really strange ways, I think. And I think it would be good for you to think about that. How we've talked about in social media, how, I mean, people say things they just simply wouldn't say in person. Sometimes they're just saying things that they really need to keep to themselves. Some people lose their jobs, right, over these kinds of acts of self disclosure in social media. So we need to think about what we self disclose, to whom we self disclose. Is it appropriate? Is it helpful? Is it beneficial? And you really continue only if the other person reciprocates. Because if they don't self disclose as well, then you begin to have a problem. Okay, because you're not going to be able to trust the person who cannot also share with you. It needs to be done when it's calm and stress free. So, obviously, when you're high emotions, that's probably not the time to deliver certain kinds of information. You want to do that when people are calm. All right, so you need to think about that so you can minimize distractions, have enough time to talk that through, whatever that self disclosure is. Okay, so and then there are guidelines for expressing emotion. Now, I have here previously discussed in class. I need to change that. So we have typically I've done it that way, but I didn't do it this way because of what happened. I knew you had your textbooks, and you didn't have the information on emotions, and I didn't want to give it to you without lecture with it. So just remember, we're going to come back to expressing emotions in the next video and notes. All right. So if you look at promoting self-disclosure in other people, which starts on 109 to 110 in your textbook, this is where they tell you, how do you encourage someone to self-disclose so you can build a relationship, right? You want to be open to the fact that a person's innermost feelings, right, involve very volatile, controversial issues and topics. Be flexible, be non-judgmental, go back to your active listening strategies, and use those kinds of responses that we've talked about, whether it's paraphrasing to someone, asking questions, right, and those several of those other active listening strategies that we have can be useful in this. You want to be supportive, you want to be empathetic, you want, right, those are the kinds of things to do. So and it does, we need to allow each other to share feelings. It's not, should be not a one-sided relationship in any dyad, no matter what it is, right? How, if it's a close relationship and you're doing that. So you want to welcome what they have to say. It's not always easy for us because, again, we tend to be, you know, self-promoting generally. That's how we are. So we have to actively work at being open to people, not labeling their emotions as good or bad, right or wrong. Remember, you don't deny people their feelings. We're going to come back to this. But that helps to be a supportive environment. That helps you to show support to them, and that you will listen to them. And this is what builds trust between you. So, and if you're building this relationship, or even it's a relationship that's been going on for a while, and this person is sharing this confidential information with you, don't breach that. The disclosure, self-disclosure, is confidential. Unless that person says you can tell somebody if you want to, then assume you don't need to. Okay, don't do that. Don't breach that confidentiality. You can really damage a relationship severely from that. So don't do that. If you feel like you're going to need to share that, you need to ask the person who disclosed, do you mind if I let, and whoever it is you're going to tell, let them know? That's what you do, okay? If you feel like you're going to have to do. If the person says don't share, then you don't need to share, okay? So that's very important. Now, this last thing is these 5 easy steps, and I'm just going to go through them, point a couple of things out, because some of this we've already talked about. So we have this model. We have a couple of other things we're going to be doing with these ideas of how to respond to people. And if your self-disclosure, they're saying, and of course we already covered perception in chapter 8 because I moved it, which is fine. But you might familiarize yourself with that again if you haven't, the idea of perception checking. All right. So, and these are not to be used in everyday situations. You don't say, okay, let me go through the 5 steps before I decide what to say to somebody. So obviously it's for certain times. I mean, when it's highly emotional, right, volatile, and the information is sensitive, right? If it's sensitive, then you've got to, you want to try to use these, okay? So you can go back to perception checking. This expands this idea, okay? So the first thing you say is what happened. So this is that raw data, the facts, your observations. Was it behavior that you saw? Is, again, that's something somebody did or said or whatever it is. What happened? What was the event that happened that you're self-disclosing about, right? So this is behavior of a person in a specific set of circumstances, and it can be verbal or nonverbal, just like we talked about before. So that's a review using that question. What does it mean? That's a review too. You're offering, right, your interpretation of that behavior and action. You're using I language, right? When I see you come home late, an hour after curfew, if you're talking to a teenager, or a young adult or whatever, right, I'm thinking this, so I'm thinking that you're seeing, friends when you should be coming straight home after work. So what does it mean? So what happened? What are the facts, the observations? Offer your interpretation. Use your I language like we talked before. So far this is all review. The things that are added now are a little different here. And again, we have another model later that really kind of tie all of these things together that we've been talking about. But this new one is, how do you feel as a result of your interpretation? So, in other words, right, you need to state how you're feeling. So, what happened, raw data, what it means, how you interpret it, how you feel as a result of how you're interpreting, because you need to realize that your interpretation could be incorrect, it could be inaccurate in some ways or in all ways. So you're going to say what it means. You're offering interpretation using I language, owning your perception, your interpretation of this. And then how do you feel as a result? I feel confused. I feel angry. So you're going to say that kind of thing, right? Your interpretation comes from your beliefs, your values, and your understanding, like we've always talked about. And that's why you want to say these things to someone, so that you give them the opportunity to respond to you, right? So what's the result? In other words, because you have interpreted this behavior of someone not coming home, we'll make it a spouse. It's a little easier. So if you so this person's coming home, like 2 hours late after work at night, so they're getting home very late. And so you're offering your interpretation, which could be you're seeing friends or somebody else, instead of coming home, and I'm worried about it. I'm concerned that you're doing this. Those are feelings, right? Um, and because I'm worried about it, uh, I don't know really what we're going to do from this point on, because this has been going on for however long, specify, for 2 weeks, you could say. And because of that, you're going to give the consequences. I feel confusion again, anger, whatever it is. And as a result, I don't, if you can't change that behavior, then it may be that I'm going to have to address this in a way such as I'm going to go somewhere else to stay for a while because something isn't right here. Um, you get the idea, I think. So then you can state your intention too. So consequences and intention. We'll be coming back to this much more so, but your again, this is what is the result, the consequences of what you intend to do. What are the consequences and what are the intentions based on your interpretation? Then you ask for feedback. So, do you understand how I've interpreted this situation? Is it right? Are you staying away because you don't want to be with me, or you're staying away because you have found somebody else that you want to? So you want, am I right? Is this what's happening? So you're asking for clarification, based on all of this. That's your whole purpose in this, is to get it out there, self-disclose why you're reacting a certain way, and what are the results, the consequences of how you've interpreted it, and getting feedback from them. So because that's in the book that way, I wanted to make sure we kind of hit on it briefly at least, and then we'll kind of be building on that as well. So I hope that I know I'm not looking at the camera all the time, but I'm really just speaking as I probably typically would in class, except that I don't get to see all of you. I will practice this some more and try to make sure that I can see different faces of my different classes out there. I really miss everybody being in class. So and I'm working on some other things to help us try to get that sense. So just give me a little bit more time this week, and I will get some more things figured out. In the meantime, I'm going to do this lecture for chapter 6, and then we'll be covering emotions after that. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye.